numbers is different than 0.25 following 5 zeros. So 0.250000. How those differ when you look at the decimals and the different sides of the decimals. Then we'll follow this, talking about the different notations, expanded notation, and how really this relates to understanding the values of the decimals as well. So the behavioral expectations, again, just talking about how today is going to be a little bit more personal, how it's going to be more individual, but to remember to respect others' work time and their ability to work and not to distract them. Continue to praise them for the things that they are doing well and to maybe give them different options to do when they're not doing so well. Okay, so the agenda, vocabulary review, lesson, activity, and closure. The objective again, students will read and write decimals through the thousandth using different notations. I'm probably going to be struggling with that for a while too. I got to get used to that. So to review then, I just added this so that we can discuss as a class the vocabulary. We can bring out those vocabulary decoder sheets again, run through it a couple times just to review what the terms really mean in terms of understanding the decimals and the place values. So the steps of instructions then, we're going to really talk about how to use base 10 numerals and the difference between that and decimals. Talk about the number names, so having to write out in words numbers is also important for them to identify the decimals. And then the expanded form. So just how we talked about earlier, how these really relate to decimal values and what it means for students to understand something like this, fractions and decimals, and how they relate. Okay, so we'll go through a couple of those examples at least twice and make sure students have a full understanding. So then we'll jump into the guided practice. This little guided practice activity is more kinesthetic. So we're going to have we're going to call it jumping decimals. So we're going to use a ball or something spherical to place in the middle of the room as our decimal point, and students will be given an individual digit, and they will represent that digit and where they stand in line with the decimal point. So say we give a student number 9, they represent the number 9, and then I will say the number for 56.97 or 56 and 97 hundredths. The student will then have to go next to the student who represents the 7 and the ball, and then other students will have to line up according to their point. And then I'll just give other numbers, either using the same numbers, and they'll just have to move around accordingly together to create that respective number. Okay, and for students who can't really move around or because they have an inability, then they can just use something like a bean bag where they can toss their place, their value, the number that they represent, into that decimal place. Rather than having to get up and move around, it still keeps them engaged and understanding of where numbers should line up according to the decimal place values. Okay, moving into the independent practice then, the activity is a 3-level guide. This is going to allow them to familiarize themselves with the new terminology and to demonstrate the knowledge about the multi-digit numerals and how to properly read, again, verbiage, words, words, and numbers, numerals as well. And then how to manipulate them, so how to add, subtract them, and three different forms that we talked about: the base 10 numerals, number names, and expanded forms. Okay, and then just pretty much the main point here is to explain the meaning of each level of question in that 3-level guide, helping them to understand the different levels of being able to find the answer in their book, having to use a combination of both the book and what they've learned previously or from this lesson, and then having to extend their thoughts from what they've already learned from their own lives or from their own experiences, and using those experiences to answer the questions. The 3-level guide will be the first formal assessment in this lesson group. And then finally, we're going to end with a little closing discussion, just talking about the questions that they have, about the decimal place values, how we write them differently, whether the questions in the 3-level guide, we can run through those quickly, and then just like what notation that they feel most comfortable in writing. Maybe some like the expanded form better than writing it out in words, or the base 10 numerals. So we'll see where the students stand in that, and then we'll base off the next lessons based off that. Okay, finally is our lesson 3. The topic is comparing and ordering decimals. And the objective for this lesson is students will compare 2 decimals to the thousandths place using math symbols. So even the state district goes right into it, comparing the digits using the greater than, equal than, or less than symbols to record the comparisons. And so the creative introduction is going to be watching some YouTube clips of Olympic races. We're going to talk about how we understand of why the guy or the gal won the race. How do we know that they won? Why was it impressive that one scored lower or higher? Like, how do we understand that unit of measurement and understand which is best? So how are decimals relative to each other in terms of rating them and the type of measurement that we're using? So, like, how do the officials calculate times, and how is less more in this instance of running a race and keeping time? So then we'll talk about the expectations that they have, or that we have together as a class, giving feedback to the students on how they've been behaving the last 2 lessons, and encouraging them to continue to do well and stay focused on this last lesson for the day. So then the agenda is a review. Jump back into the review, go right into the lesson, practice a little bit with the activity, and then finish off with yet again another discussion, making sure that the students really understand the content and that we're not moving too far ahead. So the review is going to be more of what they've already learned, checking to see what they know about the comparative math symbols. So asking students to identify the different math symbols, and asking them if they have any certain ways that they remember, which way is the greater way, which way is the less than way, and how to maybe even write an equal sign. Maybe even students need a refresher on that. So the steps of instruction then. After introducing the symbols, I'm going to move the focus towards the numbers. So through guiding questions, use examples to demonstrate the differences of close decimal numbers. So just a couple examples I have here: the 8.43, 8.4, and then 8.20 and 8.201. There's some obvious differences in here, as they can see through the numbers, but as they have learned previously, they might get confused on the 3 and if that adds value to the number or if it lessens because it is farther back in the decimal spot. So we'll clarify that in this section using the decimal tables, and then think aloud. We'll go through again why one number is larger than the other and comparing the values. We'll do that at least 3 times, and then if the students are ready, then we'll jump into the guided practice. So the guided practice, students are going to use the mini whiteboards. I'll project up 2 numbers, 2 decimal numbers, and what students will do is then write the appropriate or the correct answer of the symbols on their whiteboards and then just show it to me, demonstrating that they understand what the symbols mean in comparative or in relation to comparing the numbers. And then just a little adaptation just on the side is to help students recall the meaning of the signs by displaying the ways that they said that they remember the symbols, or by other ways. Like I had the example of the alligator. The alligator wants to eat the greater number because it's hungrier, and so it's going to go for the larger number. So whether drawing little teeth on the symbols or just writing a little something about them on the side of the whiteboard or on a poster board that's displayed in the classroom will help them identify and recall these symbols and the meanings of them. So then the independent practice, I will give them the QAR activity to demonstrate their knowledge of what they just learned. This will assess the student's ability to compare decimals using math symbols of what we've already learned in this lesson through written explanation that can be referred back to lesson 2 and how they have to write out the numbers, and answering word problems, again identifying words or identifying the numbers within the words. And then just using decimals in a real world situation is really important, again, for them to understand why we're doing this, what it means for them, and just the importance of it. So again, simple instructions just to remind the students of this has the 4 levels of thinking. So again, what I find in the book, what the book can help me find in terms of my own thinking and using the book, and then having to use my own thoughts to try and bring into this math lesson and my own experiences in answering the questions. And then finally, just a closure, just another quick discussion, asking the students to tell something that they've learned throughout these 3 lessons and where they can put this information into their own lives as well. Like I said, this does not necessarily need to be mathematical related, as long as they have the ability to explain their thought process verbally is what I'm really going for in this closure. And that's about it. The 3 lesson plans for the mock EdTPA. Thanks.